Hi, I'm Mikaela Hoxmeier, and this is my curriculum comparison presentation. I decided to do the project approach for this presentation. Here's a quick introduction to the project approach. The project approach bases learning on projects. The projects are centered around real-life subject matter. Studies from the projects are in-depth, and investigation over real-world topics is carried out. The projects are designed to be integrated into systemized instruction and are intended to help achieve curricular objectives. A few key aspects of the project approach. For one, there's a set of teaching strategies that is used to guide students through meaningful topics. Teachers, when using the project approach, are simply facilitators in the students' learning. Rather than giving them the information directly, they're just helping them investigate and find answers to their questions. Next, the project work meets learning needs while showcasing the opportunity for student creativity, valued ideas, and nurtured interests. So it's still meeting those learning needs while having the students come up with their ideas and using their creativity to come to reach those learning needs. Next, the teacher uses student wonderings to provide experiences that encourage students to reach their own discovery and answers through inquiry-based learning. This is a very important part of the project approach because these projects are not simply coming from a curriculum or teacher's manual saying in September you need to do the tree project. Rather, they're using the students' questions that come up in discussion in the classroom or wonderings that they have, maybe from recess that day, or something very simple that starts constructing the new project idea that will be carried out in the classroom using the project approach. Finally, the project approach consists of three main phases. There's phase 1, the beginning of the project, phase 2, developing the project, and finally, phase 3, concluding the project. So what makes the project approach valuable? Well, for one, students are engaged in the learning. Like I mentioned, how the projects have to come from those student wonderings, the questions of the students. They're going to be very engaged in their learning because these are questions that they want answered. These are things that weren't simply given to them in a textbook, but they are wondering these things. They're trying to discover the answers to them. So that's going to automatically heighten the engagement in the classroom because they are trying to come to their own discovery through these projects. Projects are over everyday and real-world topics. They're very relevant to the students. Projects should not be over topics that are not realistic or relevant to your students. They need to be something that they are interacting with daily, that is meaningful to them, and it's not just a waste of time over some made-up idea or something that they cannot really connect with on a daily basis. Like I mentioned earlier, projects emerge from student interests and student questions. They also have a hands-on learning experiences. We all know that those experiences are more memorable. I know that I think back to elementary school and the things that I can really remember well or when we did projects. I remember actually reading Stone Soup in elementary school, and we kind of went through the whole unit, and we did a reader's theater and all these things. And then the culminating project was to actually make Stone Soup at school. And I'll never forget that because it was hands-on. We actually cut up all the vegetables to put in the soup and so on. So we know that students are more likely to remember those things that are hands-on, that they're actually getting to do and create and come up with themselves. They're also going to learn real-life value of reading, writing, and numbers. So they're using these other curricular areas of reading, writing, and numbers within the project and within those questions that they have. So it's really using those everyday skills of that reading, writing, and numbers and connecting it to the projects, such as reading about what they're learning, writing and note-taking, or reflections over what they're learning. And then the numbers part could come from data they might take over what they're observing, anything like that that might come out of their projects. It also provides opportunity for critical thinking and problem solving. Again, the teacher is simply a guide. They're not going to give the students the answers right away. They're going to have simply help them investigate and come to those conclusions by themselves. So the students are going to have to use their critical thinking and problem solving skills to come to some conclusions by themselves. Also, goals within a curriculum are integrated into project work. The projects need to be aligning to standards or whatever objectives or goals that you're already teaching within your curriculum, so that those align nicely and students can attach that to the learning needs required there. And finally, project approach boosts student confidence and abilities. They're going to feel very confident in being independent and answering questions by themselves and carrying out the steps necessary to come to their own conclusions and carrying out those discoveries. So that will help build their confidence. So what would this look like in a school? For school implementation, I think this is something that educators are really yearning for, this kind of approach, and they're realizing that there is a need. Within the last few years of education, we know that due to state testing and all those other demands, that there are rigid pacing guides and intensive curriculum being placed on districts and teachers that are being expected to be carried out with fidelity and all of those things. And what we're starting, I think, to realize is that students need to have that hands-on learning that we talked about, those projects that is going to engage them and really help them attach meaning and relevance to what they're doing, rather than just trying to raise test scores and things like that. So I think overall we're coming to a realization that this is we need to be incorporating this into our instruction more, because we have gotten away from it, in my own opinion. I believe that also, if you're implementing the project approach into school, it really does lend itself well to science. Many of the projects have science backgrounds. In fact, it reminds me of our new science standards in the state of Nebraska, and a lot of the curriculum that schools in Nebraska are adopting to kind of meet the needs of those new standards. We're seeing a lot of projects being tied in and being carried out in order to kind of meet those standards and prepare students for science assessments, especially on the state tests. And so it does lend itself well to science, but it could tie in well to other subject areas, like we mentioned earlier, the reading, the writing, the math piece. You could connect those science ideas to other subject areas. I think if schools were going to kind of take on the project approach and use it as part of their instructional methods, then I can really see districts composing a list of potential projects. So maybe it's that first quarter, there's a list of 15 or 20 projects that you could choose from, but you'd still have to kind of follow that model of using the student wonderings. And so if a student has a question about something and it kind of guides you into one of those projects that the district approves of, then you could go ahead and pick that one and run with it for the time needed. However, with the project approach needing to be student wondering led, then there might be a time where questions haven't really pointed to any of those approved projects. And so maybe you have the teacher then take that to administration and try to get approval for the project that they need to kind of meet those questions. So that's something that schools would have to work through. I also think that schools would need to require less rigid lesson plans, or at least a different format of how they want those to look. It'd be more of a 3-step guide, kind of like in the video that we had in Module 2 over the project approach. You can kind of see the layout for that lesson plan. And administrators would have to kind of realize that it might not look like our traditional lesson plans that are being submitted, but it could be a little bit more lax in showing that they're going to be flexible over time based on student discoveries throughout the project. And then finally, of course, you would need strong professional development and training in order to have teachers feel prepared to be teaching this way. And to continue kind of that school implementation, there'd be 3 phases, and this is kind of what that might look like as far as planning goes. So phase 1, beginning the project, you're just getting started. Your lesson plan might compose of what are you going to be discussing, what's the field work going to look like, how are you going to represent that, the investigation, there's a big piece, and then finally the displays of the learning just through that phase 1. Then in phase 2, you're really developing the project. So the investigation and inquiry, there are going to need to be investigation opportunities that often include note-taking. So maybe you're going outside of the school and you're finding whatever it is that relates to your project, and students are taking notes and observing and all those things. Bringing in experts and having experts talk about whatever it is you're learning for that project is another valuable source in phase 2. taking observational drawings, finishing with a student model of what they're learning, those things could all take place in phase 2 of the project approach. Then for phase 3, in concluding the project, you're going to celebrate the learning. This would be great if it could involve parents. Maybe there'd be something like an open house, technology sharing, and then that technology could be shared with parents and other teachers in the school. Field guides, that'd be more for older grades. Service learning opportunities and community presentations, bringing students into the community to present what they've learned, what discoveries they have made, and the conclusions they have reached based on their projects. So that's just kind of what it would look like if it was being implemented in schools today. My final recommendations and takeaways about the project approach. For one, I think it attaches itself well, again, to science and social studies, but it could tie into those other subject areas as you're working through the projects. The project approach is not just for early childhood. It would be very meaningful for all grade levels. Obviously, the projects would look a little bit different from kindergarten than they might in 10th grade, but they can definitely still be tied into the learning and still be very valuable no matter what grade level that it is being used in. Projects used to do are vivid memories. So those projects that students do, like I said, kind of with the stone soup example, you're going to look back at that and remember it and really say, oh, wow, I can remember when we did this activity or this project, and hopefully they remember the learning that came with that. And I kind of, as I was learning about the project approach, I thought about my mom. She's a kindergarten teacher, and she does use a variation of project-based learning. She uses centers in her kindergarten classroom, and I've really seen, just from her instruction, how it's worthwhile and engaging. I can still remember many of the things that I did in her kindergarten class through projects, and so I do think that it is important that way. And it would take getting used to as a teacher to guide instead of lead, depending on how you were trained maybe, or the classes you took in college, or what your district does. I think it would definitely take some adjusting to learn how to guide students through their investigation. However, I think it would be very valuable if we were able to kind of move towards more of that facilitator approach instead. The lesson planning would also be an adjustment. It would have to be more responsive and flexible rather than rigid and super planned out. You know, it might change from day to day based on the questions that students are having and the new ideas that they're creating. And then finally, the project learning could be difficult or just different from what we're used to in order to assess. I think districts would really have to think through how they plan to assess project-based learning and what that would look like. I would assume they would want to use rubrics that would be fitting towards all sorts of different projects, but that would be a learning curve as well if they were to start using it in schools that we were in. And finally, I just have my references that I use to help find information for this presentation. Otherwise, this has been my curriculum comparison presentation by Mikaela Hoxmeier over the project approach.